she screamed before she even stepped off the porch. "You don't belong here." Karen Winter's voice echoed down the cul-de-sac like a fire alarm no one asked for. The sun had barely reached its afternoon peak, and yet the quiet street of Crestwood Oaks was suddenly ablaze with tension. Neighbors peeked through curtains, dogs barked from backyards, but no one intervened, not yet. She wasn't screaming at a thief or a trespasser. No, her rage was aimed at a man sitting quietly on the curb, a man with a torn coat, a grizzled beard, and a handwritten cardboard sign resting against his knee, "Hungry Vet, God bless." He wasn't panhandling aggressively. He wasn't moving. He wasn't even speaking. He simply sat, weathered and weary, as if the pavement offered more peace than any shelter could. But Karen couldn't stand it. The sight of him, this invader, as she saw him, offended her sense of control, of curated beauty and gated privilege. She marched closer, her designer heels clacking sharply against the concrete, her iPhone already recording. "I don't care who you are or what your sign says. This is private property. You're lowering the value of this entire neighborhood just by breathing here." The man raised his eyes, slow and steady, not startled, just patient. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm not asking for anything, just resting my legs a while." That calmness enraged her more. "Don't ma'am me, you lying sack of garbage." She spat, and without warning, lunged for the old canvas bag beside his cart. "Let's see what trash you're hiding in here." Her fingers dug in and yanked out a worn pouch full of wrinkled bills and spare coins. "You've been stealing," she shrieked. "All of you are the same frauds." The man stood, slowly, deliberately. He made no sudden moves, only placed one hand slightly in front of him. "I need you to give that back," he said. His tone was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. She laughed, high-pitched and theatrical. "Give it back. This isn't yours. I'm turning this in. You're lucky I don't have you arrested." She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, exaggerating every word. "There's a dangerous man in our neighborhood," she said, staring him dead in the eyes. "He's threatening me, loitering, possibly on drugs." The man didn't flinch. He just looked beyond her, scanning the rooftops, the reflections in windows, the parked cars along the street. "Understood," he whispered to himself. Within minutes, the sirens came. 3 squad cars pulled up. Officers jumped out, assessing quickly, hands hovering near their holsters. "Sir, step back from the woman," barked one. The man complied, hands raised. "My name is Ethan," he said, calm as the wind. "There's identification in my inside coat pocket. Please retrieve it carefully." Karen screamed louder. "Don't believe him. He's faking it. He attacked me." But the youngest officer was already pulling out a black leather wallet from Ethan's coat. He flipped it open and froze. Sarge, we've got a situation," he muttered. The sergeant took one glance at the badge inside, a real federal badge, FBI, clearance level red. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back immediately," the officer said, now turning toward Karen with a completely different tone. She sputtered. "What are you talking about? He's a homeless junkie, you can't be serious." But the sergeant wasn't listening. "Sir," he said to Ethan, uncuffing him gently, "was your cover blown?" Ethan gave a slight nod, compromised. Was observing community behavior for a special outreach program. She disrupted it. The street had fallen silent. Windows that had only moments ago been cracked open now slid fully up. Phones were out, cameras were rolling. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. Her righteous fury melted into confusion. "Then panic, you mean? He's not. He's a federal agent," the officer replied coldly. "And you just assaulted him, stole from him, and filed a false police report." Karen's face turned white. The camera in her own hand was still recording. Ethan turned to her, then calm, composed, with a look that could dismantle egos. "People like you," he said, "are why I do this job. You don't just call the police, you use them as a weapon." And today, that weapon backfired. But he didn't smile, he didn't gloat. He just turned toward the sergeant and asked, requesting immediate contact with field office. The officer nodded and stepped away to radio in. Karen tried to backpedal. "Wait, I didn't know. I didn't mean any harm." But no one heard her anymore. Or maybe they just didn't care. Justice for once had answered faster than she expected. And this was only the beginning. If you're hooked on this explosive Karen 911 story, make sure to subscribe to Sham Stories, tap the bell icon, and tell us in the comments what would you do if someone called the cops on a federal agent disguised as a beggar. She thought it was over the moment they drove away. Karen stood at the edge of her driveway, arms folded tightly, eyes scanning the street that once felt like her empire. The officers had taken Ethan away not in handcuffs, not in disgrace, but with the quiet respect of men who understood they had made a dangerous mistake. And though they didn't say the words aloud, Karen knew the air had shifted. That man wasn't just some filthy beggar. He wasn't a vagrant polluting her neighborhood. It was something else, something official, something powerful. The badge still haunted her vision, and the words, "You just interfered with a federal operation," echoed louder in her mind than any siren. But Karen Winters had built her entire life on never being wrong. She wasn't about to start now. She refused to be the villain in a story she still believed she owned. And if you're hooked on this tale of mistaken power, real justice, and the unraveling of a suburban tyrant, don't forget to subscribe to Sham Stories. Hit that bell icon and tell us in the comments what happens when entitlement crashes into the truth. For hours, Karen wandered around her house, phone in hand, scrolling social media obsessively. Her camera footage had uploaded automatically. She didn't even realize it until notifications started pouring in. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands, comments, shares. Karen tries to arrest undercover FBI agent became a trending clip within 12 hours. Her face mug, yelling, shrieking, was now a meme. The very tool she used to prove her innocence had become her public humiliation. Her inbox overflowed with hate mail and sarcastic advice. Maybe don't scream at veterans. What's it? You'd like to get owned by a federal agent. Lady, you picked the wrong day too, Karen. She tried deleting the video, but it was too late. Copies were already everywhere. YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, even local news. Her employer, a private real estate firm, emailed her a courtesy notice of review. The HOA board, where she once ruled like a queen, suddenly fell silent. Not one of them responded to her group messages. And her name was quietly removed from the official newsletter as community liaison. Karen's world was cracking, and she felt it. Still, she convinced herself that she could turn the tide. All she needed was leverage, a distraction, a way to reclaim her version of the truth. And so, under the cold glow of her kitchen pendant lights, she hatched her next plan. She began gathering dirt not on Ethan, but on the street itself. Code violations, petty infractions, fence heights, driveway stains, HOA bylaws no one had read in years. She printed dozens of copies and marched house to house like an enforcer in heels. Did you know this bush violates side yard clearance? She'd ask. Your trash bins were visible from the curb section for Article 2, Paragraph 3, but something had changed. The fear was gone. Neighbors didn't cower this time. Some closed their doors. Others laughed in her face. One woman asked, "Is that what the FBI told you to do?" That night, Karen drank her wine in silence, alone on her back porch, watching the shadows move across her fence like whispers she couldn't silence. Her power wasn't gone, but it was slipping. And she wasn't done yet. The next morning, a thick manila envelope appeared at her front door. No return address. Inside was a photo, grainy, long distance, but unmistakable. It was her, arguing with Ethan, her hand inside his bag. Another photo showed Ethan standing still while she screamed at him. The final image captured the exact moment she waved his stolen cash in the air. There was no note, no explanation, but Karen understood. Someone was watching, and that someone wanted her to know. She marched to the police station with the envelope, demanding action. "I'm being blackmailed," she shouted. The officer at the front desk raised an eyebrow. Did the sender ask for anything? Karen hesitated. "No, but look at these pictures. They're stalking me." The officer flipped through the photos and shrugged. "Looks like evidence," he said plainly. "You did admit to taking his money, right?" "I was proving a point," she snapped. He was a threat. The officer leaned back in his chair. "Ma'am, we already ran the ID. He's real. Federal clearance. You're lucky he didn't press charges. You might want to consider backing off." Karen's mouth fell open. She left the station shaking, seething, embarrassed but too proud to cry. She needed someone to blame. And that's when her attention shifted to the cameras. For years, Karen had opposed private security systems in the neighborhood. She claimed it was an eyesore issue, but in truth, she didn't like being watched. Now, she wanted to see everything. She started monitoring which homes had visible cameras and which didn't. She took photos, created maps, built lists. She started emailing the HOA board demanding access to the community's shared camera feeds, especially the intersection near her home. But the board didn't respond. And then came the most humiliating. An official letter arrived stating she had been temporarily suspended from HOA participation pending internal review. That review never came. Because they weren't investigating, they were freezing her out. Back home, Karen paced. She opened the envelope again. Who took those pictures? Was it Ethan? Was he still here? Was he watching her now? She went outside and stood in the middle of her lawn, spinning in slow circles, scanning rooftops, treetops, windows. Nothing. The quiet street had never felt so loud. And for the first time, she felt something she didn't understand. Fear, but Karen didn't surrender. No, that wasn't her style. She opened her laptop and began researching everything she could find on Ethan Reynolds. What she found terrified her more than it reassured her. The name showed up in scattered federal logs, redacted reports, obscure hearings about surveillance ethics, infiltration operations, and homeland protection measures. His digital footprint was both thin and vast, like someone who existed only when needed. She couldn't even find a driver's license photo. The more she looked, the less she found. And the silence was deafening. 2 nights later, someone knocked on her door at 11:14 p.m. She froze. The porch light flickered once. She looked through the peephole, but no one was there. Just a shadow, long and narrow, stretching across her porch. On the doormat lay a single item, a copy of the HOA handbook, the page about neighbor conduct highlighted in yellow. She slammed the door shut, locked all the bolts, and slept with the lights on. But sleep didn't come easy. Every shadow now felt like a threat. Karen Winters could no longer walk through her own home without glancing over her shoulder or checking the blinds twice. It wasn't just the videos, or the mysterious photos, or the public disgrace. It was the silence that followed. The silence of neighbors who once smiled now crossing the street to avoid her. The silence of the HOA board that once welcomed her control now treating her like a virus. And worse, the silence of Ethan Reynolds. The man she had tried to humiliate, expose, and eliminate from her neighborhood had not only turned out to be a federal agent, he had disappeared without retaliation, without confrontation, without explanation. That quiet was the most terrifying thing of all. But if Karen was anything, she was stubborn. She told herself this wasn't over, that she wasn't going to be cast out of her own kingdom without a fight. She didn't know where Ethan had gone, or what he was planning, but she was determined to take back her power before he could strike again. And if you're following this chilling spiral of paranoia, secrets, and suburban warfare, subscribe to Sham Stories, hit the bell icon, and ask yourself how far would you go if your reputation was unraveling. Karen began her counterattack, not with lawyers or threats, but with whispers. She knew how rumors worked, how fear spread faster than truth. She invited a few old friends for coffee, choosing only those who still responded to her messages. She told them she had uncovered the truth that Ethan wasn't just an agent but a rogue one, someone planted in their community to spy not on terrorists but on them. She suggested that Crestwood Oaks was under secret surveillance, that Ethan was testing psychological reactions to homeless infiltration, that their privacy was already compromised. She added just enough hesitancy in her tone to sound like she didn't want to believe it herself. That made it more believable. Two of her guests nodded quietly, one looked pale. That evening, she typed an anonymous letter and left it on 3 different doorsteps. You are being watched. He is not who he says he is. She thought this would rally support. It didn't. Within days, one of the women she'd invited over posted a long status on Facebook, calling Karen unwell, obsessed, and a danger to the community. That post went viral locally. A meme surfaced showing Karen holding binoculars, with the caption, "Neighborhood Watch" or "Neighborhood Wacko." Her car was egged the next morning. Teenagers rang her doorbell and ran off laughing. Someone placed a plastic rat on her lawn. Karen snapped. She bought a drone. It wasn't a toy. It was a higher-end, night vision-capable surveillance machine. She claimed it was for monitoring suspicious activity, but really, she used it to scan every inch of the block. She flew it past garages, over fences, through alleys. She hovered near windows and rooftops. She watched everyone, but mostly, she looked for Ethan. She wanted proof he was still there, that he hadn't vanished, that she wasn't crazy. And one night, just after midnight, she found something. The drone captured a figure slipping into the wooded path behind. Lot 17, a figure with a limp and a thick coat. Karen zoomed in, stabilized the footage, and nearly dropped the controller. It was Ethan. He moved like a man who knew where the cameras were, who avoided streetlights instinctively. He wasn't just hiding, he was working. Karen recorded the footage, saved it to 3 different drives, and began composing an email to the local newspaper with the subject, exposing the truth, but she never sent it. Because the next day her drone didn't return, it crashed. Not due to battery failure, it had been jammed. She found its remains in her backyard, snapped in half, the SD card missing. Her blood ran cold. That night, someone knocked on her back door instead of the front. She didn't answer. They didn't leave a note. But when she looked through her kitchen window, she saw a shadow walking away with military posture, shoulders squared, back straight, steps even. She reported it to the police, but they barely took her seriously now. Maybe ease up on the surveillance, one officer suggested. You're not the NSA. Karen didn't sleep for 3 nights. Every creak in the floorboard was Ethan. Every car that passed too slowly was a threat. And worst of all, her mailbox had started receiving envelopes with no return address. Inside, screenshots of her looking through binoculars, of her typing at her laptop, of her watching her drone footage. Someone had turned the tables. She began setting traps. Fake packages on the porch, decoy mail with GPS trackers, motion-activated lights all around the house, but none of it worked. The person Athens she assumed was always one step ahead. Her defenses were meaningless, and that broke her. She stopped leaving the house. She pulled down all the blinds. Her food was ordered online. Her HOA fines went unpaid. Her grass grew too long. A final letter arrived, printed on plain paper, typed with no signature. It read, "You called 911, but who do you call when the truth watches back?" That night, she ripped the cameras out of her walls. Her screams echoed across the street. But no one came to check. Not anymore. Karen Winters had become a ghost in her own neighborhood. And the man she thought she could erase had rewritten the story entirely. But she didn't know the whole truth yet, because Ethan hadn't just returned to watch. He had returned to finish his mission. And she was now a part of it. Karen hadn't opened her curtains in 6 days. The morning sun that once poured into her immaculately color-coordinated kitchen now barely kissed the edges of a room swallowed by darkness. The woman who once dictated every inch of Crestwood Oaks with clipboard precision and HOA-issued warnings now walked barefoot in silence, her robe frayed, her hair unwashed, her eyes rimmed with red from sleepless nights filled with shadows, whispers, and the unrelenting presence of something or someone she could no longer define. Her kingdom had fallen inward. The neighbors no longer waved. Her porch, once decorated for each season with OCD-level detail, now collected dust and dead leaves. The only constant was the sound of her heartbeat, fast and echoing through her ears, like it was trying to remind her she was still alive, still part of something real. But reality had become slippery. Her mind, once so sharp, had started betraying her. She would hear knocking that wasn't there, smell smoke where none existed. And sometimes, most terrifying of all, she would hear her name whispered from the vents. If you've been following this descent into paranoia, obsession, and justice served ice cold, make sure you subscribe to Sham Stories, ring the bell icon, and tell us in the comments at what point does karma stop knocking and start moving. And it was sometime around 3 a.m. when the message came. A ding from her computer, a sound she hadn't heard in weeks. Her Wi-Fi had been spotty, intentionally disconnected out of fear of hackers, but somehow it had reconnected. The notification blinked on the dark screen. New video file received. No sender. No subject. Just a file named review_this_now. Her trembling fingers hovered over the mouse for several seconds before she clicked it. The screen went black for 3 seconds, then began to play. It was security footage, but not from her house. The angle was unfamiliar, high resolution with audio. The image showed her walking down the street, yelling, holding a crumpled pouch, money in her hands. Behind her, Ethan stood with his arms raised, calm and passive. But then, the view switched. A second angle, then a third, as if someone had been watching from multiple vantage points, drone level, hidden camera level. The audio was perfectly clean, like a boom mic had been placed in her face. She watched herself unravel, every word, every insult, every scream, every lie. Her breath caught in her throat. The video ended with her face frozen mid-air, mouth wide, eyes wild. A final message appeared, public or private, you decide. Below it, 2 buttons, upload or delete. But when she tried to move the mouse, it wouldn't respond. The cursor hovered over upload, blinking. Her screen went dark again. Then her webcam light flicked on. Karen screamed. She threw the laptop across the room, shattering it into a dozen pieces. Her breathing was ragged. She grabbed her phone, tried to call 911 again. But the line went dead after 2 rings. She tried again. Same result. Then her landline rang. She hadn't used it in years. The number was blocked, she answered. Stop running. The voice was distorted, not robotic, but altered. Male. Cold. Karen backed into the corner of the kitchen, her hand over her mouth. Who are you? She managed to choke. You already know, the voice replied. And you already lost. The line went dead. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, hugging herself tightly, as if her own arms could protect her from something that had no face, no shape, just endless reach. She didn't sleep that night, or the next. Then, 3 days later, there was a knock at the door. Noon, bright sunlight. Almost normal. Almost. She crept to the peephole, heart hammering. It was a woman, late 30s, simple clothes, holding a clipboard. Ma'am, I'm from the Department of Federal Internal Affairs, she said calmly, as if it were routine. I'm here about Agent Reynolds. Karen nearly fainted. She opened the door only partway. Is he coming after me? The woman smiled politely. We'd like to ask you a few questions. May we come in? Karen whispered. 2 more agents appeared beside the woman. One wore dark glasses and said nothing. The other looked directly at her with an expression she couldn't read. Not hostile, not friendly, just measured. Karen nodded slowly and stepped aside. They entered. The woman sat first, opened a folder, and began asking questions about the day she met Ethan, about her actions, about her intent. The tone wasn't accusatory. It was surgical, but something about their presence, their calm efficiency, the way they never quite blinked, made her feel as if the walls were closing in. We have reason to believe, the woman said finally, that your involvement in this incident triggered the failure of an ongoing federal field simulation. I didn't know, Karen whispered. That's the problem, the woman replied. Ignorance doesn't prevent consequences. What happens now? Karen asked. That depends, the woman said, closing the folder. Agent Reynolds is currently undergoing reassignment. He has requested no formal charges be pressed against you. Karen blinked. He would no retaliation, no lawsuits. He has opted for something called observational closure. What does that mean? She asked. It means you'll be monitored informally, indefinitely. The agent stood up. The woman paused at the door. Stay in your lane, Mrs. Winters. The world you stepped into doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. The door closed behind them. Karen stood frozen for several minutes, unable to move, think, or even cry. Monitored. Indefinitely. The phrase repeated in her head like a curse. She wasn't just punished, she was marked, watched forever. The home she once ruled had become her cell, and Ethan, the man she tried to destroy, had chosen a fate for her more haunting than jail, life under the eye of invisible justice. In a nearby van parked 2 blocks away, Agent Reynolds watched her through a secure feed. He said nothing. He simply folded his arms, turned off the monitor, and whispered, "Case file, closed." The grass in front of Karen Winter's house hadn't been mowed in weeks. Once a beacon of suburban pride, her lawn now stood in wild contrast to the neat perfection of her neighbors' yards. The weeds were like silent declarations that something inside the house had broken, but no one said anything. No one knocked. No HOA violation letters were posted. Everyone knew. Everyone had seen what happened when someone crossed a line they didn't understand. The neighborhood had moved on, but Karen hadn't. She remained a prisoner of her own mind, pacing hallways like they were prison corridors, drawing curtains, during the brightest hours, whispering to herself in mirrors. The visit from the federal agents had shattered whatever illusions of control she still clung to. Surveillance was no longer a concept, it was a sentence. She couldn't hear a car engine without thinking a microphone was embedded under the hood. Every time the light flickered, she thought a camera lens blinked back. The world around her, that hadn't changed, but her understanding of it had. And if you're still following this twisted path of guilt, paranoia, and quiet retribution, subscribe to Sham Stories, hit the bell icon, and tell us in the comments what would you do if justice didn't lock you up ... but watched you forever. Karen tried to rebuild routines. She deleted her social media, cancelled her real estate license, stepped down officially from all HOA activity. But the silence of her phone only amplified the noise in her head. Neighbors walked past her property without even a glance. A place that once held power had become invisible. That invisibility, more than anything, stung. But deep inside her unraveling thoughts, a new idea began to form. A dangerous one. If she couldn't win back her image, maybe she could erase Ethan's, not by exposing him again, that had failed, but by digging into what the government didn't want her to see. She began requesting documents, not from local offices, but through FOIA requests. She submitted obscure claims, masking her identity under pseudonyms. Days turned to weeks, and then she received a manila envelope. Inside were partial reports, redacted heavily, with entire paragraphs blacked out. But there were phrases: behavioral integrity test, public reaction stressors, civilian accountability simulation, all tied to something called Project Sabledrift. The reports implied Ethan's presence in Crestwood Oaks had been intentional, staged. Even Karen's interference may have derailed it, but she had also inadvertently exposed it. And now she held a fragment of its truth. She scanned the papers and backed them up in triplicate, hiding copies in separate locations around her house. This time she wouldn't act out emotionally, she would wait, watch, and document everything. If they wanted to monitor her, she'd turn the tables. But just as she felt herself regaining some sense of control, something happened that made her blood turn to ice. All 3 of her backups disappeared. One flash drive hidden behind a false drawer panel, gone. One copy taped under the garden stone, missing. Even the one uploaded to a secure online folder had been wiped clean. No sign of tampering, no breach notifications. Just gone. Karen stared at the blank screen for what felt like an hour. Her hands trembled, her breath shortened. It wasn't just surveillance anymore, it was suppression. She knew what it meant. Ethan wasn't finished. That night, she stood outside on her porch for the first time in a month. Her robe flapped softly in the wind. The stars were out. So many stars. Somewhere beyond the rows of houses, a car engine idled. Then, headlights blinked twice and turned off. She stared into the darkness, knowing someone sat inside that vehicle, watching, measuring, waiting. She walked back inside and left the door unlocked. A quiet signal, an invitation. By morning, a single envelope lay on her kitchen table. No stamp, no name, just 3 words typed cleanly on the front. Your evaluation begins. Inside, a questionnaire. 50 questions. Multiple choice. It looked like a psychological test, like something given in a lab. Some were standard. How often do you feel threatened in your own home? Others were chilling. If given a chance to change one irreversible action, would you? She answered each slowly, methodically. By the end, she wasn't sure if she was proving her sanity or confirming her instability. She mailed it the next day. No return address, just coordinates printed on the final page. She followed them on a map. It led to a nondescript government building in another state. Days passed, then weeks, then another letter arrived. Evaluation complete. You are not considered a threat, but you are not cleared either. Further observation will continue indefinitely. Your designation is civilian caution flagged. No signature, no seal, just a stamp that read, Federal Behavioral Monitoring Initiative. Karen folded the letter and placed it in the drawer next to her kitchen knives. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply sat at the table, looked at the door, and whispered, I understand now. Because Ethan hadn't just taught her a lesson, he had made her part of a system she couldn't escape. Her punishment wasn't jail. It wasn't social exile. It was knowing she was seen. Her kingdom of fences and bylaws and neighborhood superiority had crumbled under a single truth. Some people operate on levels you'll never understand, and when you try to rise against them with arrogance and fear, they don't strike back. They simply write your story for you and make sure you know you're no longer the author. Far away. In a secure federal archive, a new case file was uploaded under resolved civilian incident. Karen Winters. Status monitored. Impact contained. Agent Reynolds. The final note. Threat neutralized through psychological saturation. Case officially closed. And with that, the watchers moved on. Karen stayed behind, but she never again dared to look directly into a camera lens, not even her own. Months passed. Karen Winters had learned to live in the quiet, not peace, never peace, but a kind of stillness that came from resignation. She kept her house meticulously clean again, her lawn trimmed weekly by a service that never made eye contact, and her curtains remained closed, not from fear anymore, but habit. She didn't speak to neighbors. They didn't speak to her. It was a truce, born not from understanding but from shared unease. They all knew what had happened, or thought they knew. That was the point of federal silence. It created a vacuum, and vacuums filled with fear. But Karen no longer chased explanations. She didn't file complaints. She didn't call 911. She kept her head down, her voice low, and her internet activity scrubbed clean weekly through software she couldn't pronounce but now paid for annually. And in that strange rhythm of survival, a new question began to form. What if she wasn't the only one being watched? One evening in October, Karen received a small brown package on her porch. No return address, no markings. She stood over it for a full hour before bringing it inside, gloves on. Inside the box was a burner phone. It powered on automatically. A message blinked. "You are not alone." She dropped it on the floor. But hours later, curiosity got the better of her. She opened the messaging app. There was only one chat thread. The messages were old, dated months back. They weren't hers. They weren't Ethan's. They were from someone else. Another civilian, another name flagged. They do this to anyone who interferes. They call it behavioral filtration. If you push too far, they rewrite your life. Not everyone comes out to one of it. Karen read the entire thread in silence. The last message was dated 2 weeks ago. Still here, still monitored, still me. Are you one too? She didn't reply. Not then, but something inside her shifted. The next morning, she drove 3 towns over to a library with no cameras. She logged into a public terminal and began researching Project Sable Drift. Most links had been scrubbed, redirected, or archived, but a cached page led her to an academic journal on civilian behavior testing under simulated authority pressure. The abstract matched her own story like a script. That night, she texted the burner phone, "Yes, I am one." The reply came instantly. "Then you're ready. We're forming a group." Karen froze, her breath shallow, anonymous, protected, off-grid. Just us, just truth. She didn't sleep that night. Weeks later, she met one of them, a woman named Teresa, or maybe that was fake. It didn't matter. They sat in a parking garage, windows cracked, speaking in fragments. Teresa had once been a whistleblower. Now she lived in a trailer with no online presence and a Faraday cage in her closet. She taught Karen how to identify passive surveillance, markers, how to check for sensor bugs hidden in power outlets, how to mask phone pings with hardware loops. It was technical, terrifying, and addictive. For the first time since the incident with Ethan, Karen felt powerful again. She wasn't running anymore, she was learning. The group expanded, 8 people. Then 11, a digital collective, civilian caution, flagged but awake. Their goal wasn't revenge, it was awareness, exposure, quiet documentation. And if the system could rewrite lives, they would write theirs back. Karen set up her own relay node. She used a disconnected sprinkler box to mask a long-range signal booster. Every week, she uploaded encrypted logs to a mirrored database stored in 5 countries. If someone knocked again, if someone tried to erase her, the story would survive elsewhere. They couldn't silence everyone forever. Then came the news. Ethan Reynolds was dead. A car accident. Official report. Single vehicle. No witnesses. Burned. Documents found in the trunk. Closed case. Karen didn't cry. She didn't believe it. The next day she received a final envelope. No words. Just a photograph. Ethan smiling. Somewhere tropical. Alive. The back of the photo read, "Not all missions end the same. Be the author now." Karen pinned the photo inside her pantry door. Then she opened her laptop and she began to write. Not her complaints, not her defense, her story, for the first time, truly hers. The storm didn't arrive with thunder. It came in silence like most truths do. It had been nearly a year since Karen Winters watched her carefully curated world collapse beneath the weight of something larger than herself. Since then, she had rebuilt not the illusion of perfection she once chased, but something quieter, harder, and much more real. The group she now called her network had grown 17 members, all once flagged and broken by the same invisible system. They weren't rebels, not officially, but they weren't passive either. They documented, traced patterns, shared files, and remained ghosts in the margins. Karen had evolved. Her days no longer revolved around bylaws or neighbor complaints, but tracking digital trails, reading leaked intel drops, and deciphering quiet clues from deep within government archives. She no longer flinched at cameras. She used them. She no longer feared silence. She thrived in it. If you followed this journey of transformation, surveillance, and poetic justice, make sure to subscribe to Sham Stories. Hit that bell icon, and tell us in the comments what would you do if the system made you the villain, and then expected you to vanish quietly. One night a message came across the secure network, a system-wide ping, rare, urgent, a new file, top priority. The sender ID was anonymized but ended in a code only Karen recognized. She stared at the letters for several minutes before opening the file. It was a location, coordinates in the Nevada desert. The message said only, "They made me disappear. You deserve to see why." Karen didn't hesitate. Within 72 hours, she and two of her most trusted contacts arrived at the location, an abandoned government facility, sealed behind a rusted chain link fence, signs long faded, wind whipping dust over cracked pavement. The inside was stripped at least at first glance, but down a service corridor behind a collapsed supply room, they found a vault door open recently. Inside, files, paper, microfilm, drives, names, photos, entire time. It was like a museum of broken lives, each folder marked with codes Karen now understood. Civilian identifiers, behavioral experiments, containment procedures. Her own file was there. So was Teresa's. So was Ethan's, but his had an extra label across the top, recovered asset, unauthorized independent operative. He hadn't been erased, he had defected. Karen didn't speak for a long time. She and her team packed what they could, photographed what they couldn't, and torched the rest. Not to destroy the truth, but to keep it from falling into the wrong hands again. They returned home changed, not just watchers anymore. They had crossed the threshold into something else, and they knew the system knew it too. The next phase began. Karen published the story not as a blog post, not anonymously, but as a fully detailed, redacted where legally required report under a new title, caution flagged. The hidden framework of civilian observation. It didn't go viral, but it went deep. Forums, journals, academics, a whistleblower group picked it up. A few senators requested internal audits. The government never officially responded, but shortly after, the Behavioral Monitoring Initiative page was scrubbed from existence. Completely. Karen received one final message on her encrypted line. Just a sentence. Sometimes the system corrects itself. Sometimes it needs help. She didn't know if it was Ethan. She didn't need to. She stood in her garden the next morning, sun warming her shoulders. No fear, no guilt, just truth. Karen Winters had once been the villain in a story she didn't understand. Now, she was the narrator, and the story was no longer theirs, it was hers.